Welcome to your week 4 lecture. This week we're going to be talking all about the power of context. This is one of my personal favorite lectures, and I think it's one of the most important for us to consider how we look at art and how we understand it depending on our own cultural context, changing context through history, personal context of the artists and why they created it, all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and dive in. So what is this word context anyway? So we're looking at the personal, social, historical, and environmental circumstances surrounding the making, the viewing, and interpreting of a work of art. This is the very connections of a work of art to the larger world of its time and place. So I've included a little link for you here on Edouard Manet's Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, which is lunch on the grass. Very iconic painting, very controversial painting when it was exhibited. And I'll let you watch that and figure out why, and we're actually going to talk about this painting a little bit later on in our lecture. So with this whole concept of context, we're actually going to look at a German art historian named Erwin Panofsky, and we're going to look at his concept of iconography and how he came up with these 3 levels for determining meaning in a work of art, and this has to do with context. And it has to do with kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit, but also taking it down to very basic forms. So he has 3 strata of meaning. So we have the primary or natural level, we have the secondary or conventional level, and we have the tertiary or intrinsic level. So let's go ahead and look at this first one. So this natural level is the most basic level of understanding. This is perception of the work's pure form. So this is almost like doing formal analysis as well. Here we see only what. So if we consider that who, what, when, where, why, this is where we're looking at only what. We have no further cultural knowledge. So I'm going to give you an example of how we do this. So let's look at a work by Edgar Degas. This is the ballet class. This is one of many of his scenes of ballet dancers that he is the most known for. I'm sure you have at some point in your life seen one of Degas' ballerinas. But what we're going to do is we're going to strip this down to very basic knowledge. I want you to consider this, that you look at this and you say, well, there's ballerinas dancing. But I want to ask you, would every single person on the face of the planet say, yes, I recognize that that is a ballet dancer? We think this is very obvious, but that actually takes cultural knowledge for us to understand. We're looking for symbols here. We see point shoes, we see tutus, we see their posture, the way they're moving, and those are all symbols that tell us what these girls are doing and who they are. We understand this from a very Western context. You have to ask yourself, would everyone know what ballet is? If the answer ever when you're looking at a work of art is no, there might be people whose cultural context does not allow them to understand this the way I see it, then we have to strip it down further for this level. Instead, what we might say is this is girls dancing. That's a little bit more easy for everyone to kind of, okay, I can accept, I understand that these are girls and that they're moving, so they must be dancing. And we could also say we see a woman in a chair. She is reading a paper. There is a man watching. There is a mirror. So you see, we're stripping it down to this very basic, fundamental level. And what this does is it helps us pull back and start to understand where context starts to come in, where our cultural knowledge starts to come in, so we can break that down and make some separations. Also, again, here's where we would conduct formal analysis by looking at those elements of design, to what you did in your deconstructions projects a few weeks ago. That is what we would be looking at here as well. So we might say there's complementary colors here. We can have this, this blue violet here and this kind of golden yellow that the artist has created, this, complementary colors here. We could talk about line orientation, we can talk about angles, we could talk about unity, we could talk about balance. This is asymmetrically balanced. So we could start to do all of that here in this primary level. So again, it's not interpreting yet, it's just looking at what is fundamentally and basically there. So that is our what level. That's the primary or natural level. So when we move into the secondary or conventional level, we use some cultural and iconographic knowledge. This is where symbolism starts to come in, and we can see that in the content of the work. So here's where we see the who, the what, the when, and the where. We use our cultural knowledge here. So now here in this secondary level, we can say these are ballet dancers. We can start to interpret who this woman might be. Maybe she's a grandmother, maybe she's a mother. She seems to be chaperoning. We can see that there's a male, he's the ballet teacher. So we're starting to really, okay, we know who these people are based on the symbols that we recognize using our own cultural knowledge. So at this level, we're not doing any research yet. We're just using what we already have and what we already know to interpret. So we can say, what is this? Okay, we know it's a ballet class. We can use our cultural knowledge to recognize their costumes. When? Well, if we look at the didactic information, so we know that this is by Edgar Degas. We know that this is called ballet class. We see the year, it's 1881, so we know, okay, this is late 19th century. You know, what clues maybe also give us ideas of the time period? So I want you to consider that as the clothing, the style of the painting. What else tells you that this is late 19th century? And where we can use our cultural knowledge to discern that this is in Paris. This is the Paris Ballet. Edgar Degas is a French artist. So we can start to kind of use, you know, maybe you don't have that cultural knowledge yet. So if you don't, that's okay. Again, when you're doing Panofsky's 3 levels and walking through it, at this conventional level, I want you to use what information you have in your own hands. You interpret it. Maybe you'll find out later that, oh, you know what, I was wrong about that. And then you have to start to think, what is my cultural knowledge telling me? Where might it be flawed? Where do I need to expand my horizons a bit? Students always have the most trouble, I think, with this first level because they want it to be more complicated than it is. So when we actually are writing through these levels, just remember, keep this level very, very basic. It's okay. This, when you're doing a Panofsky analysis, this is going to be the shortest part, right? Unless you go into a lot of formal analysis, but this is very basic, so don't be afraid to keep it simple there. Don't be afraid to interpret using your own cultural knowledge here in the conventional level. But then we move into the tertiary or intrinsic level. So intrinsic means belonging naturally. So this is those things that are the personal, the cultural history. A work is a product of a historical moment or movement. So here we see all of it. We see the who, the what, the when, the where, and then especially we see the why and we see the how. So this is kind of, you know, the icing on the cake, this level. This is where we move into something a little deeper, a little more detailed. We use our cultural knowledge and we ask what it all means. This level is always going to require you to look outside the picture frame and outside your own mind. It's going to require some research. So how? Here we can conduct research into Degas' artistic style, his influences. What artist was he looking at? What was he trying to do in his compositions? What was going on historically that might have impacted the way he was painting his paintings? We know that Degas was interested in the idea that cameras worked in photographs. A lot of his compositions almost feel like snapshots where there are forms cut off on the sides as if this was a camera, so we're not seeing that whole scene. It's not composed in a classical, traditional way that a painting is, where you see this whole perfectly composed image with everything included. This feels almost like we're a little bit of a voyeur. We're watching this scene without, you know, we're included as a viewer in a way, and we have to consider our own role in viewing this based on the way he's composed it. So if it was this perfectly balanced scene, we'd feel a little more distant from it. It was this separate thing, but now we feel like we're kind of watching and looking in and considering what lies outside those edges of the canvas. And let's look at why a little bit. Degas actually creating some social commentary here. So the ballerinas had chaperones to make sure that they're wealthy male patrons who, you know, these were working class girls. This, by the time Degas was painting these scenes, the height of the Paris Ballet was kind of dwindling. we didn't have these prima donna, these beautiful kind of starlet ballerinas. These girls, they were working class girls. They weren't necessarily considered the most elegant or beautiful creatures. It's, there's a lot of study and historical thought that Degas was a little bit of a misogynist. He didn't really like women, is what there's this thought. I personally just think he was incredibly fascinated by them, but he didn't always paint them in the most attractive way. He has many scenes of women coming out of the bath, for example, and they're a little animalistic in a way, like the studies that he does of them. So there's some interesting ideas going on there. He was very interested in the concept of movement, the way these women moved, but he's giving us some social commentary. So this woman is sitting here to make sure, again, that these wealthy patrons, who these, again, were working class girls, they didn't have a lot of money. They were in the ballet as a job to feed their family, to provide for their family. By the time you were 16, you were, almost over the hill. So these were young girls, and these wealthy male patrons would sometimes take advantage of them. So this was a very common practice, something that was, kind of everyone knew was happening but never was talked about. So Degas kind of bringing this to light. He's painting a scene where everyone knows what's going on. So this scene that, initially seems very kind of mundane and innocent has some very critical undertones of society, some very interesting concepts that are coming through. But we wouldn't know all of this if we didn't take the time to dig a little bit. So remember that art is not something that we can just take at face value, that we can expect every time we look at a work of art that we should understand it completely. This is human nature all in play. This is different cultures, different ideas. We can't know all of it, can we? We can't understand all of it just at face value. So that's why I love Panofsky and love introducing students to this concept, because it takes us from that very basic level of just looking at what is there without using any of our cultural knowledge, stripping that away so that we understand where our influences and interpretations come from. And then in the conventional level, we're using that and really looking at, okay, what am I seeing? And then in that intrinsic level, we're digging deeper. We're looking at the influences. We're looking at what was going on historically, culturally, politically, that was impacting this work and caused it to be created and received the way it was. So Panofsky is really useful and really important when we're analyzing works of art. And I want you to try this with Jan van Eyck's The Arnolfini Portrait. So I've given you a link here, and it's one of those smart history links, and it will talk about all the symbolism that is found in this painting, of which there is a lot of symbolism going on here. So look at that, see if you can, look through the painting and find these symbols yourself, and consider how this changes the way we might understand the painting today, and how it might have meant something different for its original audience. So let's look at how viewers make meaning. So meaning of an image does not come from the image itself purely. Rather, it is formed through a complex social process that involves the image, the producer of the image, how the viewers interpret the image, and the context in which the image is seen. So we have this chart to kind of help you make sense of this. So we have this meaning, but meaning isn't just one-dimensional. It's not just one thing. So we have to consider what it meant for the producer of the image. We have to look at the image itself. So that would, again, be that primary level, doing that formal analysis. And then we have to look at how the image is seen, the context of how it's seen. Are we looking at this in a chapel where we are feeling like this is a religious experience? Is it in a museum? Is it on a computer screen? Is it in a movie? Is it in a magazine? Are you seeing street art out on the street? All of this changes the way that we understand an image. Seeing the Mona Lisa in the Louvre and seeing the Mona Lisa on a t-shirt is quite different experience, and we change the way we interact with it. And of course, we also have to consider how we ourselves interpret the image and what that might tell us more about ourselves and our own cultural makeup than it does about the work of art. So let's look at the French Academy and Salon, because we're going to tell a little bit of story of how art went from one context into another context, especially in the modern era. And so we have the Academy, or this idea of these salons, these exhibitions. This dates back from the 17th century, so it was around the 1660s, I believe, that the first exhibitions and the first academy in France, in Paris, was formed. And this went on to the early 20th century and then kind of dwindled. This includes the Académie des Beaux-Arts, which was very well known in Paris. So this school taught and critiqued French culture, mostly artistic production. So everything from poetry to painting kind of went through the lens of the academy. And it was dictated how art should be made. So the government acted as a patron, controlling and regulating artistic practices and styles. So if you worked outside the salon, chances are you weren't really a successful artist. To be a successful artist, you had to be accepted into the salon. That's where those commissions came. That's where the wealthy patrons came from, where your work became important. So the salon literally means gatherings. It's called the salon because of the room that the work was exhibited in the palace. And so this was an exhibition that was hosted by the academy. Again, artists had to be accepted members into the academy in order to show their work in the salon. And these were the most important exhibitions of their day. Thousands and thousands flocked to see these. Typically ordered by importance and by genre. So let's go ahead and look a little bit more closely at the salon. So this is an excellent example of how the salons would have been arranged. So you can see that there's some very large scale paintings, there are some very small, and the larger the painting was, the more important the scene or subject matter was considered. And of course these large scale paintings were only reserved for certain subject matter, and we'll look at those in just a second. But you can see this isn't how museums display works today, is it? We don't just plaster the walls with work, but this is how it was done. And you can see these very important people. This is the 1824 Salon at the Louvre, and Charles X is distributing awards. So this is kind of a special moment. The interesting thing about the salons is that they were open to the public, so you got a very broad range of people that attended these events. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at Manet here, this painting that we saw at the very beginning, and why this was considered so controversial, especially in the context of the salon. And you should have already watched that clip, so you should have some information already. So we know that Manet was really distorting space, that he was taking a subject matter that was deemed quite inappropriate. This naked woman, so we'll talk a little bit about the difference between someone who's nude and naked. She's not this classical nude figure where she's more of a representation of idealistic beauty. She's a real person here. She's looking straight out at the viewer, kind of very brashly, and not denying her nakedness and not seeming to be bothered by it. Her clothes are kind of crumpled up. These are two students here. The woman in the background is very out of proportion. So all these things that you would have already, I don't want to spend too much time on that because you watched that clip. But this was considered scandalous because of its subject matter and its composition. So again, painted visible brushstrokes, not common of high art of the day. We have distorted space. The woman in the foreground looks directly at the viewer. Why does she do that? And he's also referencing some classical material here. So he's referencing Raphael's The Judgment of Paris. And what we have here is, this is just a small section of that. This is a replica. This is an engraving after Raphael. So when we see something that is after an artist, it means they're basically making a copy. So he's making this, Marcantonio Raimondi made an engraving after this painting, and this is what the whole painting, or this is the etching after the painting, would look like, and you can see the whole scene here. But just this little section right here, we can see the similarity in the composition that is going on that he's referencing here. So he's referencing classical material, and of course we know that classicism was very important. It was considered this idealistic form of painting, and so he's referencing that, and yet he's breaking all of the rules. There's also this play on words, judging Paris, because this painting, engraving is called The Judgment of Paris. which I'll quickly tell you the story behind this scene. So Zeus was throwing a party, and I'm giving you the very truncated version of it. And they, of course, did not want to invite the goddess of discord, because who would want the goddess of discord at a party? Well, she shows up anyway, briefly, and what she does is she takes a golden apple that engraved on it says for the fairest, or to the fairest, and tosses it into the party and leaves. Well, at the party, we have Hera, who is Zeus's wife. We have Aphrodite, who is the goddess of beauty and love. And we have Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom, who is Zeus's daughter. So we have these three women who are quite full of themselves. And they say, Zeus, you have to decide who this apple goes to. Which of this is the fairest? Well, he's not going to pick between his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of beauty. So he very smartly goes down to earth and approaches a mortal man named Paris and says, guess what? You get to decide. So the three women, of course, try to manipulate him. They all come down naked, because they think what better way to win over this man than by appearing in all of our glory. And then they all offer him something different. Offers him world empire. Athena offers him success in battle to kind of, defeat all of his foes. And so they're all trying to bribe him, but Aphrodite was the smart one. Aphrodite said, I will give you the most beautiful mortal woman on earth. And Paris was like, done and done. So if you're familiar with the story at all, Paris was the son of Troy, and the most beautiful woman on earth at the time was Helen. Helen was married to the Greek king, and long story short, the Trojan War is what results. So this is kind of the background story behind that. So I'm giving you again the very truncated version of that myth. But so there's this whole kind of idea of destruction that comes from vanity that's going on here. And again, that we're judging Paris. He's kind of judging the city that he lives and works in. So I want you to consider that. Why might Manet be judging the city that he lives and works in this composition? And this is very shocking because this was exhibited in the Salon. But not in the Salon in the way you're thinking. Under Napoleon III, there were so many artists that their work was rejected by the Salon, and that was starting to become kind of an issue. So what they did is they put on something called the Salon des Refusés. And so this is the Salon of the Refused. But it was still sponsored by the government, and so it was still, highly attended. And so this was still kind of a slap in the face to the Academy and the Salon, even though it was exhibited in the Salon of the Refused. This did, the way Manet very brashly exhibited this painting, the guy had a lot of guts, is it paved the way for a lot of artists to create work that was considered quite controversial. And that did eventually lead to the forming of the Impressionists as a group of artists who exhibited in the Salon des Refusés, and of course we know who a lot of those guys are. But it doesn't mean that Manet was the first or the only. He is just one of the most iconic that kind of, pushed back against the way that art was being made. Another one that did this was Gustave Courbet, and you can see that this is in 1849. This is before Manet painted Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. And this is called Burial at Ornans, and I won't go into analysis too much on this because I want you to watch the link that's going to talk about this composition. But there's some interesting things going on here that aren't maybe quite as brash and in your face as what Manet was doing, but still very considered very controversial. This is a very, very large painting. And so we know that, these large paintings were the ones that were considered they were supposed to be a very important subject matter. This is a burial, and yet we have no idea who's being buried. And so there's some interesting ideas going on there. So let's talk about some different types of context that are going on that we want to consider. And so the first one we're going to look at is narrative context. So this is when a single work or a series of works tells a story or a portion of a story. sometimes in sequential order. So we have to look, okay, is this work of art telling some kind of story, or is it just, is it a landscape? Is it a portrait? Is it a scene, a still life? Those don't tend to have narrative context quite as much. Sometimes they do. But something like this is by Jacques-Louis David. This is the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine. Here, this is very much a part of a story, kind of a very important moment. We see the moment when Napoleon takes over the Pope's job and crowns his wife Josephine as Empress. This is a statement that he's above the church. So he's just been coronated as emperor, and instead of letting the Pope go ahead and crown his wife, he takes over. And so this is kind of a changing of the guards in a way, a very important moment of Napoleon stating his power. So we can see again there's a story going on here. We want to look at architectural context as well, or the space that a work of art is exhibited in. So if we look at Bernini's Ecstasy of St. Teresa here, yes, it's very beautiful in its own right, and we can fully understand, we can't fully understand the work until we see it in its original context. So we could look at this and we can see the whole scene. We can see the arrow about to pierce her heart and this look of ecstasy she has on her face. But what a difference when we see it the way it looks in Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. This ornate, massive, incredibly detailed space. It changes the way we consider it. It changes the way we interact with it. How we might, you might look at this and think, oh, this is in a museum setting, and no, all of a sudden it's not. It's in a chapel. There's a sense of reverence here. It changes the way we understand this work. So I want you to consider how the space you're seeing a work in might change or even manipulate sometimes the way we understand that work. Let's talk about the museum as context. So although we are used to seeing art in the context of a museum, we need to remember that it almost always has a different original context. It wasn't designed necessarily to be seen in the context of a museum. Museums almost become like time capsules. They're timeless. They're kind of this place where time stands still. It's not kind of this active, space. Museums tend to act as shrines, and they manipulate our understanding of a work, and that understanding can vary upon how an exhibition is curated. So that's why, exhibitions in museums, they really take a lot of time considering how should we display these works of art. What should the wall color be? How should the lighting be? Which works should we put next to each other? Because that all changes the way we understand an exhibition in its entirety. So when you go to a museum, I want you to start considering how works of art are arranged. Are they arranged by style, by artist, by theme? Are they chronological? Is the setting formal? Is it casual? Is it reverent? So take the Mona Lisa, for example. This iconic work is seen everywhere. Coffee mugs, t-shirts. We associate it as this grand masterpiece. Yet did you know the Mona Lisa is actually quite small? This is a picture my husband took. I'm up here. I think that's the back of my head right there. There it is. It's in the center of one of the galleries in the Louvre. People walk into the room, they walk directly to the Mona Lisa, they take out their cameras, they snap a picture, and they walk away. And most often they don't even look at all the incredible, incredible masterpieces that are in the rest of this room. I believe it's just opposite on this wall. There's a massive painting of the wedding feast at Cana, and it's a gorgeous painting. But people, it was a very interesting experience for me, because this becomes like a cultural bucket list item to check off. Yep, seen the Mona Lisa. It's behind bulletproof glass. There's actually a red velvet, rope around it, so you can't get very close. The French, for some reason, don't really mind people taking pictures. When you go to museums in Italy, they're much more stern about this idea. But it kind of changes the way we interact with it. We've made it very important, and I won't go into too much detail. There's a good documentary on Netflix about the Mona Lisa and when it was stolen. It was stolen at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was missing for 2 whole years. It was a very well-known, very well-respected piece. Before that, But that theft kind of skyrocketed it into international fame, and because of that, it really has become the most famous painting in the world. So again, context, stories behind works can really contribute. Have you ever asked yourself, why is the Mona Lisa so famous? Let's look at an archaeological dig as museum and context. So here the dig site becomes its own museum. So if we look at this tomb in China with the standing soldiers, these famous terracotta soldiers. So when you see just one in a museum, kind of under glass, or just that one soldier standing against a white wall, it changes again the way we understand it. This site becomes a museum in and of itself. And seeing them in their original context, I think, is much more breathtaking and much more revealing about the original purpose of these works. Because remember, not all art is just meant to be looked at and, oh, that's nice, that's beautiful. Sometimes in certain cultures, these images have religious purposes, for example. So continuing this idea of the archaeological dig site as museum and context, the Colosseum is another great example of this. So the Colosseum itself has become, in a way, a museum. It houses small exhibitions and artifacts found at the site. But the site itself can only truly be understood as site-specific as if you're there. If you're not there, you can't really understand this space in the same way. And if you have a chance to get there, I highly, highly recommend it. Let's look at natural context. So a lot of artists in the 20th century started experimenting with earthworks and work that uses natural materials or uses the environment. And Walter de Maria's Lightning Field is a great example of that. He created a work of art that relies on the natural world for its context. So this is there's 400 stainless steel lightning rods that he has placed on a grid-like pattern in this lightning field in New Mexico, where there's, lightning is very commonly active at certain parts of the year. And if you removed these lightning rods and placed them somewhere else, the artwork no longer exists. So it would be very easy to destroy these works of art. And the work changes depending on the weather. So the way the lightning strikes these poles determines the way the viewer experiences this work of art. So there's this idea of it, it's out of our hands, so it becomes something bigger than the artist, bigger than the viewer, these natural earthworks. And you can actually you can book a night. It's not terribly expensive. There's a little cabin on site, a very rustic kind of a primitive style cabin, and you can go and hope that you see the way the lightning strikes these rods. And so consider that, how natural context can change and shift based on the surrounding world. Let's look at urban context. So this is kind of the opposite in a way of a natural context. So we have, work that deals specifically with the urban landscape as a platform. And Banksy uses this as a platform to create art that speaks about contemporary social, ethical, and political issues. If you haven't heard the name Banksy before, Google him. He's a very important contemporary artist. He's a street artist, but he's kind of gone past this concept of graffiti art. So this is one of his works called Phone Booth. He did this in 2006, and it's one of those iconic London red telephone booths, as if it's been kind of murdered. So he's taken a cultural icon and changing its context here, and I love the paint, the red paint kind of dripping as if it's blood. But this is his most recent work. He's done this year in the Gaza Strip. The guy's quite brave. He's gone into some highly, dangerous areas. And there's a link, and you can watch the little video clip that he made about this project in the Gaza Strip as kind of this vacation site. So it's very kind of ironic, of course, in nature. But he talks about, the fact that there's so much going on in the world, and he painted this cat because, you know, most people just watch videos of cats on YouTube instead of watching what's important going on. So he's very much politically active, social commentary in his work, but he almost always deals with this idea of the urban landscape and how that really affects people. He's very interested in the effects of the urban landscape on humans. And be sure that in your reading this week, you read about the gates, and there's a link for you to watch about this. And this is Christo and Jean-Claude. This is a work that took them from 1979 to 2005 for it to come to fruition, just because of all the red tape. And basically what they did is put hundreds and hundreds of these gates with these orange fabric kind of curtains all through Central Park. And so read about this again. And it was a really beautiful work. I wish I would have been able to go and see it when it was up. But again, deals with the urban landscape, kind of disrupting it, but also celebrating it as well, and seeing it, you know, throughout the different seasons is quite cool. So read about that. If you have any questions about any of this, don't hesitate to ask. And again, so we want to look at, you know, how context changes. It's not something that is static or stagnant, and that impacts the way we understand a work of art, the way people in the past understood it, the way people from different cultures understand it, and how that can be manipulated as well to send a certain message to the viewer.